Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Stock Talk. It's Andrew and Austin. Are you ready to meet your new neighbors? Austin, are you ready to meet your new neighbor?
I'm so excited to meet my new neighbors. Can you tell me all about them?
A little bit. Yeah, it probably won't be Larry Fink, who is the CEO of BlackRock, but
That would
BlackRock, yeah, yeah, he's just going to buy up all the neighborhoods. He won't live there. So some people may have seen this in the news. It's not in mainstream news. There is some mention, but it's not being promoted. A big deal. But BlackRock, and certainly not BlackRock. There's lots of pension funds that are buying up whole neighborhoods across the U.S. I would suspect that's also in Canada as well. I haven't gone that deep into this because of a number of factors, but just I wanted to get people primed on looking at this as some of the news out there as to how do I formulate my ideas and macro themes for the last couple of years, seeing things as they progress forward. And there's a lot to unpack here. So where to start? I mean, let's start at them buying up neighborhoods. This isn't good nor bad. I mean, we see lots of real estate, investment trusts like REITs. There's lots of companies that have bought up buildings and whatnot. This is this has been developing over time. What's more interesting about this, though, is, and we'll get a little bit deeper into it, is the tie-in between government, the massive printing of money in the last 5 years, say, or even since 2008. And once again, if you look at a chart of the printing of money over the last 100 years, it's a small incline and then a direct pivot up in the last 10 to 12 years. So what's interesting to that is when you see that they're buying, a large number. I mean, I've seen numbers in the hundreds of millions to, hundreds of billions of assets that they're buying. Here, let's take a look at this here for a second. This is the chart I've talked about a little bit that can give you a sense of the money printing that's been going on. Now, that isn't a chart that makes sense to anybody. And you can't make sense of that chart. What is interesting is when you see that chart, is when did we hear about the thoughts of a great reset? That's actually somewhere down around well before this big, huge spike. So why do I mention that great reset, which I've mentioned for years? Why do I mention World Economic Forum for years and Davos, where they all meet? This isn't a conspiracy. It's very open. It's easy to go Google World Economic Forum and BlackRock. Larry Fink is a main contributor, has been involved with the World Economic Forum for quite some time. These are major globalist, whether it's Goldman Sachs is included in there, all your major funds are Democratic Party funders. They're progressive movement people with the same theme that they're telling you their vision of the future and how it's going to play out. And I kind of joke the World Economic Forum probably is the best predictor. It's been an amazing predictor for exceptionally rare events like COVID, the current hacking that's been going on, food shortages, which they've been threatening. And of course, if you're paying any attention to the whole notion of you'll own nothing and be happy, which is their big prediction for 2030. So I'll let you jump in for a bit because there's a lot there. And I don't need to go down any rabbit hole of what that could mean, what it's going to look like. Will they succeed at doing what they're doing? It's just, this is very open. They're very open about what they want to see happen. And these are the players involved. So whenever I formulate where to put some money, why not put it where the big players are putting it?
Yeah, that's a great point to kind of look at. These guys are constantly seem to be on the forefront, constantly seem to know what's going on, what the agenda is looking like. And I think if we scale it back right down to kind of the beginning of this conversation and talking about BlackRock buying up entire neighborhoods, where that becomes a dangerous thing, I think, other than the obvious idea of why would you want a hedge fund owning your entire neighborhood? Putting it in very, very simple terms, you remember the game Monopoly from when you were a kid?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So you remember how you'd always play with that one guy who would buy like 6 properties in a row, and every time you came around that side of the board, you knew you were paying him. You were going to land on one of his spots, no matter what. It was just, okay, well, I'll just get my money ready because I'm paying Jason $10 here or whatever it was.
Yeah.
That's essentially, in very simplistic terms, what we're looking at with BlackRock. They're buying up entire neighborhoods and not allowing the market the housing market in those areas to actually compete, to actually grow in any way. They're able to rent out those properties for whatever prices they're going to set on it.
Yeah.
They essentially hold on to each of those houses. They never put it up for sale, and it causes a permanent class of renters in that area, which
Yes.
essentially fits into this narrative, this idea of squeezing out the middle class, which we are seeing, which we've talked about before, about the
Yeah.
billionaire class and the consolidation of wealth in that top 0.1%.
Yes.
But it essentially, because there's no natural market correction to it, that there can't be when it's all privately owned by one group.
Yeah.
It's never going to allow for a healthy growth of a middle class. And you're seeing that in the United States, you're seeing it in Canada. I am sure our friends in Europe would say they're seeing the exact same thing over there.
Yeah.
And then when you start to look into where are these guys involved, what are they doing, what is their agenda, and they're open about talking about their agenda.
Yeah.
But what is that path forward? It starts to all those puzzle pieces start to fit together. I won't say fit together very nicely because it's actually very terrifying. But
Yeah.
it starts to line up and make sense if you know where to look for this information.
Yeah, and once again, it's not a conspiracy because, like I said, all along this entire time, they're very open about it. You can go visit their websites, and they'll tell you exactly what they're planning. You have to take people serious when they have $8 trillion. BlackRock has $8 trillion. BlackRock was hired by the government in 2008 to come in and help with the financial crisis, which was never solved. We've already, kind of talked about that. That's been prolonged. So they came into the housing market in 2008. And they bought Merrill Lynch some of their assets, well, a big portion of assets in the housing space. And then also in 2020, like here, the Fed hires BlackRock to help calm the markets. The Fed, the Federal Reserve, which once again is neither federal and it's neither a reserve. It's money. It's a money printing place. It's not associated with the government, although it's a private group. Usually, it's once again interchanged from people in government and then investment banking that rotate and go in and out. So you can see it works synergistically. And this is why I've said in the past too, that you could argue in the past that politics didn't play as much in the economy when things are in normal, stable times. But politics is absolutely critical right now. And that's why we see everyone's focus on politics, is that is going to determine the economics moving forward and the finances moving forward. And to me, it's not hard to figure out who did well over COVID. It was big business.
Yeah.
They've basically tried to bankrupt everyone who's small, medium-sized businesses. But yet somehow during this entire crisis, you couldn't do certain things. You couldn't go to church. You couldn't go to the next door neighborhood store, but you can go to Costco and you can go to big box stores. So there were certain industries that you were allowed to shop at that were big enough, had enough clout. And then there's ones that you're not allowed to shop at. So if you want to put a good indication of what's coming down the pipeline with the people currently in power, you don't need to look too much further than what the response that they gave you for the current issues that have been going on. So, and if you look at Mark Carney, who was the Bank of Canada leader that was kind of touted, I think it was in 2008, for handling the crisis. They had pretty sound banking standards here in Canada. He's very open in his new book about the same. You're going to hear the same story as you're hearing from Larry Fink, you're going to hear from World Economic Forum. There's going to be a wealth transfer. We've seen that already. The wealthy are getting exceptionally wealthy, but it's going to be following this whole ESG movement. There's going to be a transfer of your wealth. If you've been paying taxes for decades, it's your wealth is going to someone else. And I assure you, it's not your neighbor. So there is a big shift happening. And when you see, again, if you look at that chart of the amount of money being printed, and then you see who's printing that, well, the Fed prints that money. The Fed prints that money. And who did they hire? They hired BlackRock. And BlackRock went out and said, okay, what should we be buying? What could we buy? Now, to buy all the commodities out there would be too much of a signal. Although I'm sure they're buying some commodities. But one of the smartest things you could do for that size of money is buying as much land as you can, which is what they're doing. And as you mentioned, Austin, the fastest way to take the sales out of wealth transfer or building up assets for the regular person is to own a house, and that will be removed. I think that's what we're kind of seeing is a suggestion that way. It may not get pulled off, but to spend that level of money that they're spending along with pension funds and other funds, take BlackRock out of it, all the other pension funds that are going in and buying property, is you don't know. Someone shows up at your house and gives you $50,000 over asking. It's not going to be Larry Fink. Like, it's going to be someone that's working for them, and you think you're selling it to another family. You probably aren't. You're not selling to retail investors anymore. And that's where the concern is coming. Yeah,
well, because you have a firm with $8 trillion in the bank that is outbidding the average American in the housing market simply because they can. It's if you're a family of four and you get in there and you have a budget of $750,000 and that's going to be your hard cap. Maybe your hard cap's $800,000 and BlackRock says they're going to come in and pay $850,000. Well, if I'm the person who's selling my home and I have one real estate agent coming to me and saying, well, we got these guys are going to do, they'll go up to $800,000, but these guys will do $850, no problem. I'm like, well, give me the $850. That's just
sure
good. That just makes sense to me, right? But they're outbidding the average American person with it should be important to say with their own tax dollars, essentially.
Well, that's the funny part. Yes. So it's so this is the synergistic, symbiotic relationship of when you see this universal movement and planned push that you see from progressives, say, and these are progressive firms of where they're going to see the future and how they work together. And it's this, I see universalists is that anybody who tries to push a universal theory or universal belief system upon an entire planet of people who are diverse and different, that's generally communism. And now this isn't communism as one would see back from the 20s, and you see this type of thing, although it's the same talking points we hear today. And we do see active, obviously, with Antifa, that's in a communist group. BLM to some degree is as well. They're very touted and celebrated, but their talking points, if you look back at typical doctrine, it's the same thing. So you see there's an undertone of what's happening, what's playing out. And once again, we're thinking, I'm kind of mentioning some of the uglier negative sides of things, but you have to keep that in mind. But it's not going to be the same thing. I guess what I'm getting at is, as in history, it's never exactly the same. It repeats, but it just looks different. And this will be a type of authoritarian system in which, just like communism, the elites are going to be doing just fine, and then the vast majority are going to suffer. Hopefully not terribly, but it won't be great, and there won't be a lot of upside for sure.
No, absolutely. But I think it's important to say that it's not necessarily all doom and gloom either, because
yes,
through this, through the COVID situation especially, you have seen politicians that have gone against the grain of the standard, lock everything down, shut down small businesses. Even in Canada, as much as I will harp all over the government out here in Alberta on many, many things, they did a lot of good work as far as trying to allow small businesses to be open. I know in Vancouver, they did a really good job with restaurants for the most part about trying to keep them open as well. We see it in a lot of states. Governor DeSantis down in Florida, Governor Abbott in Texas I personally think did an exceptional job in their response and handling of the situation and getting things back to normal as quickly as they could. So there's glimmers of hope out there.
Yes. Oh, for sure.
So that's important to note as well, that there's people who do realize that that's not the route we want to be going down and are trying to come up with alternative solutions. It's just very difficult when you're competing against your own Federal Reserve and $8 trillion in the bank and an entire agenda set out by the World Economic Forum. It's a difficult thing to battle against, but there are people doing it.
Yes. And the average person, if they actually look at this, won't be for it. But if you watch mainstream news, you'll get an idea that there's consensus worldwide that everyone wants to do this. There's consensus from all scientists and doctors that COVID is this and this and this, which is absolutely false as well. There's plenty of places you can look to see petitions signed by doctors against lockdowns, whether it's MIT, Harvard. I won't even go down that road, but there's plenty.
Ivermectin as a COVID treatment as well is another big thing.
There's no
Dr.
end.
Brett Weinstein talking about that a ton. So there's always competing narratives with these kind of things, and both sides of the argument may have things that are right. There may be facts coming from both sides, and it's important for people to not just take anything you're hearing from one person, even from us. Don't even take everything you hear from us as gospel. We might be wrong. We think we're not. We've done our research, but it's important to do your own as well and look into these things for yourself.
Yeah, and for me, I try to keep away from saying that I know anything or here's the solution, because that's a far higher pay grade. What I will do is I'll just say, here's the news that's not being told or not being promoted. Here's the science, which is easy to find. Here's the actual data of what's out there, and that is what's needed. Because people do get a little angry when I say this, but once again, if you've got media for the masses, then you are the masses. If that's what you're consuming all the time is the standard mass play that's meant for the masses, then you believe in that story. And that is what a good chunk of people believe. And, we've talked about in other senses of, well, why would they lie to me? That's not the right question to ask. Why would someone lie to you? They lie to you all the time. Is that are these companies trustworthy and good stewards of good decisions? And some of them are very easy to find out. I'll just say this. If you looked at the pharmaceutical industry, you wouldn't need to spend more than 30 seconds to find that they're not great stewards of health. Let me just put it at that. If you're unsure, look up Purdue Pharma and OxyContin. And look no further than that if you want to see who's involved, who's being sued, who's lost in court for their stance on that, and the amount of big pharma companies and McKinsey that are implicated in that. That's just one of the latest ones. There's tons. There's hundreds of them. So you have to be critical as to why you're being told information for whatever reason. For me, I just look at it and go, here's the narrative that they're pushing. And there's good and bad. So with the ESG and even with BlackRock buying all these homes, what's the good? Well, the good is that if you look at markets and someone would say, let's compare that then to gentrification. Like, let's pull us back to the original Larry being our neighbor. People would say, well, you go to inner cities and people came in and offered a better price for a poor black family and then gentrified, move them out. That's not very fair. You go, no, it wasn't. But the argument would be, well, we gave them a better price than that anyone else would. They've done well. That's how the market works. Yeah. So that's the flip side of the argument is, listen, if someone's willing to buy your house and you're willing to sell it, you're not being coerced. No. The difference, though, is they've been getting free money for a long period of time. And if you've been giving free money at basically 0% interest rates, and I assure you, the average retail investor is not getting 0% rate. But if you're FANG, yeah, you're able to pay basically no tax or very little. You're also able to borrow from the Fed and from institutions at almost nothing. That gives you an unfair advantage. Okay, that's fine. We know that the fairness is a silly concept to me anyway. But it's looking at the long-term implications of having BlackRock own entire neighborhoods. Yeah. What could that look like? Maybe it's great. And maybe it does. Maybe it gets a lot of people that are devastatingly poor into better housing. Maybe it's good. So there is a good side to it. Maybe it's good. But at the same time, when things like this have happened in the past, it's not been good. So one can hope, and maybe that there's good to be had. But once again, regardless of outcomes, is that it just highlights that we're in a very chaotic time of massive transition. And it's not going to stop. We're not over yet, just because maybe we'll get the summer off. We're not even close to being done. There's going to be a reset of currency in some way, shape, or form. They've been hinting at it for quite some time. It looks like it'll probably it will be a digital of some kind. How that plays out, who knows? But I think it comes back, and it comes back to, what are the assets that you have? What is the actual wealth? And if you own cell phones and gadgets and those are almost worthless. There's no resale value. There's not worth much. Even cars, to some extent, their prices have gone through the roof, like a used car. In 10 years, if you don't have an electric, that might be absolutely worth not even parts. It could be just total scrap. Yeah. So you want to own your house. Like, if you have a house, keep your house. that's an actual asset. If you have gold and silver, that's actually an asset. If you have any commodities, that's an asset. We're going to have to use them, and it's going to be required in the future. If you own the stuff, the gadgets and the stuff that makes things, man, there's not a lot of value in any of that.
Yeah, no, you've hit the nail on the absolute head there. And I would go back to your point about, could this be a good thing? Yes, yes, there could be some benefit to it, but I would encourage anyone who's skeptical about this being a bad thing to look at the current housing crisis that they have in Ireland right now, because they're in a very similar situation where not to the extent where it's been one major firm buying up everything. It's more so smaller firms and companies buying up small areas or streets, like 6 houses on a block or something like that. And they are in dire straits when it comes to the cost of rent of living, especially in a city like Dublin over there. But on a wider scale, the difficulty for anyone in kind of the 35 and under age range to buy a house in Ireland, it takes 5 minutes. Type in housing crisis Ireland, and you will find tons of articles pointing to the direction of how difficult things are over there right now. And I'm not saying for sure that's what's coming to the U.S. on the other side of it, but if you could follow the blueprint, follow the money, that's the way it looks like this thing could very easily go. And it's going to be a very, very difficult time for people in Ireland over the next few years. They're looking at massive changes in government. I mean, their latest political poll, I think, had the party they voted for, or at least had the idea to vote for the most, is in favor of completely abolishing a property tax just to make it easier for first-time home buyers. Which I would also say, okay, well, let's also take a little look at that and who else might benefit from that as well.
Yes.
But I would encourage people who are interested in this kind of topic to look at that a little bit more to see, well, hey, this is maybe the one direction this could end up going.
Well, it's the unintended consequences too. Like, I mean, people in Vancouver, especially me having been in Vancouver, the anecdotes of 5 years ago of literally if you had a house in Kitsilano, say someone's going to show up at your door and say, I'll give you $4 million for your house. Like your house might be worth 3, might be worth 1.2. Yeah, I'm being exaggerated. Maybe they're giving you twice the price, and they'll say, "I'll give you cash tomorrow." And inevitably, it was an Asian buyer coming in and buying up entire blocks, entire parts of the city. And when you say, "Well, that's just how the market works," now that it's not hard to find out the devastation that had on this market of that influx of money, and also the corruption behind that influx of ghost financing money. That's a whole other show unto itself. And that's one city. This is happening all over now. And I see, BlackRock, because they picked up this business that they worked in 2008, they're already in the business of owning land and mortgages and assets. They know that there's a big change coming. They're involved because they meet at Davos. They talk at Davos. They're lead speaker. So I mention all of this because it isn't a conspiracy. They're out in the open. If you go look, it doesn't take very much effort to go find out. And it doesn't mean this is what's going to happen. It just lets your brain start to think of these are some of the plans that they're openly talking about. And once again, maybe they're openly talking about and going in a different direction. I don't know. We just want to let people know that this is out there, that they have a very, very keen ability to forecast the future with the events like, especially World Economic Forum. They were able to run a whole pandemic scenario 8 months ahead of COVID. I mean, which is amazing to be able to outline an entire plan that would work in case of a pandemic. So if you want to find out what might be coming down the line, that go look at those sites that talk about their plan, and then look at what you have as an actual asset, and that's probably your best bet. That's why, for years I've been into mining. You want commodities, you want people, and I want that upside of not just owning like copper or silver. I want to find someone who's finding it, because that's going to give you a much higher bump. Now it's a lot more risk, but just for everyone, it just gives a sense as to how do we view macro events, what we're looking at, who am I listening to? It's not just Andrew with far scope ideas and silly nonsense, is that I can point to who's saying this, and they're not getting on CNN all the time. I mean, they might get a mention here and there, so that this is how news works, is if they mention it or if they put it in column D on page 40 in the New Jersey Times, then they could say, we reported We reported the news. It's just we didn't promote the news.
Yes, exactly.
And that's also an interesting way one can get around the democracy, and you have access to information. You do have access to information. You just have the onus of putting a little bit more time and effort into it. And the best way to look at is go directly to the sites. Go listen to them and take them for their word.
Yeah, exactly. It's important to stress that fact of, if you're going just to the main page of any news site, you're not going to see what you're looking for or what you should be looking for. But it doesn't take a lot of digging to get to gather this information and look into it. And the point you made about looking at what you have and looking towards your own assets, it's extremely important right now to be consolidating your own wealth around you and your family, your community, however you want to set yourself up. But it's important to be thinking about that and thinking about it long term. And if you want to continue to be successful in this new kind of world that's being carved out here, you have to be on top of these things. You have to be looking in the right direction and keeping kind of one ear on the ground and following the signs with this stuff.
Yeah, and my message to everyone is at the end of the day, is to have responsibility for yourself. If you can convince me in any time in history that government has done something for the betterment of the people, then I'd love you to send that to me. Because overall, in major decision making, it's not. And not only does it bring the question up of who are the people, these groups have made it very clear as to who they think the people are. And it's the time-old struggle of those with power fighting to retain power. And if you cap everyone where you'll want for nothing and you'll own nothing, then let me assure you, that's what the future looks like for your children as well. So that is a very troubling path to lead down. And funny enough, those billionaires and companies that are hitting like $1 trillion who are lauding these ideas of equality and you'll own nothing and this, I mean, they're not giving up anything.
No.
They're going to keep their wealth. I assure you, they're not going to change there's going to be no change in lifestyle for them. But also with that, everyone else's lifestyle will be lowered down into a muted area so that they continue. And if that's what you want, then great. But the people that are yelling the loudest at how unfair things are at the same time are supporting those that have all that power, which I find so ironic today. And it doesn't take much effort to find that out. So chaotic times, I know this sounds a bit doom and gloom, but take responsibility for yourself, put a little bit of effort in, because right now is a period in time that hasn't really existed. It's been such a major period in time, and it takes a lot of effort to turn off all the noise and to focus in on, if they succeed in doing what they're planning on doing, there's lots of great things about that. We've talked about before. There's lots of wonderful things. So align your funds in that direction. Otherwise, if you're just listening to the noise and you're part of the masses, then that's what you're going to get. I guess that's at the end of the day. And we've been doing very well over here by listening to this message, and I'll continue to do so. It is that I want to get this out to more and more people, because there is change coming. It's happening, and it hasn't really started yet. Like, if you think it's been bad now, I assure you there's more coming.
Yep, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head there. Just to kind of cap off everything you've said, is that you have that sense of personal responsibility needs to be at the forefront of everything you do. And that's why we put it at the forefront of our kind of investment strategy and how we look at companies and how we evaluate things is this personal responsibility, this idea of, hey, we are understanding what the path forward is going to look like. How are we going to maximize on that?
Yes, perfect. Well said, Austin. Thanks so much. Hopefully this wasn't too doom and gloom. Believe me, there's a way out, and there's lots of opportunities out there. And luckily, we're blessed to be working with a lot of ones that we're extremely confident in. And I hate to say it, but I don't count myself in as one of the ones that's going to have to struggle very much, because I think that our thoughts are right. I hear what these people are saying. I understand what they're saying. I see where the positive is, and that's where I'm putting my time and my money. I'm not going to focus in on all the negative, because I have no impact on that. But if I focus in on this great notion of like a 5G electric future that's cleaner, that's brighter, that's where I'm going to focus my attention and laser sights and put money towards those innovations and focus on that, rather than worrying about this dystopic future, which we definitely can hear about, because we don't know how it's going to end. We don't know how the story, we just know the story is evolving. And I would rather focus all of my energy and attention into that's what's positive, because I'm going to have a much better day than if I'm worried about what these elites are going to do to me. So
no, you're absolutely right. Maybe we'll do a chat later this week where we'll talk about all the positives and all the great avenues and ideas that we can take this down the road. And it's important to just say for people as well, if you're enjoying what you and I are talking about in these morning chats, the best thing you can do is keep listening to us, obviously, if you're enjoying what you're saying, but share it with someone you know. Send this video if you like this video, if you like what we're talking about. Send it to a friend of yours. Say, hey, check out these guys. I think they might be onto something. It helps us a lot in the long run, helps us get more views on our videos and stuff, and puts these ideas and this kind of way of thinking in front of more people, which is important as well.
Yeah, and also it's of your own self-interest. If you like some of the stocks that we've been involved in, and that that you maybe have bought as well, if that message gets out and other people hear about companies like Desert Mountain Energy and QU and NG Energy, if they hear about them, they're more likely to go buy it as well. And as you know, in anything, that's how the market works, buying. So yeah, I forget to mention a lot, and I'm glad you brought that up, Austin. But yeah, we want your support, because getting a message out is the most important thing. And if we can help people find some really innovative ways to invest and to how to view the markets, then that's great. That's a great thing to do.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, have a great day. Thanks, everyone. And we'll talk to you real soon.
All right. Take care.